so much in an interview. This is your space, but I just want to affirm it.
Well, I wouldn't have felt free to say these things when I was either active duty or with the federal government. So now I'm Alicia Unleashed. So
You jokingly said that before. What does that mean to you? You're Alicia.
I think I can be totally forthright in what I say without concerns about retribution.
Were there times in your experience where that type of fear of retribution led you to censor yourself?
I would say yes, because oftentimes there's a process where you have to be cleared to speak to certain people. They often want to see your comments. And even if it's, say, giving an academic lecture, they often will review your slides and you have to provide a disclaimer. These are my personal views and do not reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the Army. And the same thing with the federal government. These are my personal views and do not reflect, the federal government. And so you always have to give that disclaimer. And giving that disclaimer, I think you're conscious about not being overly critical. And I don't disparage anybody who is active duty or who is in the federal government who is very cautious because there is the very real fear of retribution now more than ever. And the reality is, if you're doing good work and because of comments you make, you are no longer able to do that good work, who has really benefited? And so I'll give you an example of, and this was with my father, was in the civilian sector, but the same sort of thing. My father was a dentist, and he took his dental boards in Pennsylvania in the early 50s. And it's an oral exam. They actually have to do dental work on actual patients. And they pulled aside all of the black candidates and they said, "We really like the way you people sing. Can you do a Negro spiritual for us before the board?" And they did. And when I was young and angry, I used to think, well, why didn't he just refuse to do that? And then I thought, if he had refused to do that, he wouldn't have passed his boards. And so all of the patients that he was able to take care of, his entire career would have been ended.
It sounds like you think that there's a compromise to be made in these types of situations. What? Because I think that we live in such a unforeseen moment in American culture and society, and specifically related to doctors. There are a lot of laws being passed or passed already which seek to punish medical providers for providing the type of care that you seem to advocate for. Um, what advice would you give them about if they're struggling to maintain their values?
Well, what I would say is align yourself with people who can fight for you, and that's medical societies. So, for instance, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they have a governmental affairs office, they have advocacy groups, the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, the American Medical Association. And so, having them fight on your behalf, I think, is very effective. Also, there are groups. I was very involved with Vote ER, which is a nonpartisan group that is involved in civic engagement in healthcare settings. So, for instance, they register patients to vote. They don't support any particular candidate or policy. They're about getting patients registered and getting patients to vote and getting patients to see the connection between their health care and their vote. And so I think getting involved in that is also a way. So, for instance, in Maryland, my Maryland state senator provided me with an opportunity to be involved in writing some legislation to help protect healthcare providers who provide reproductive health care. Now, Maryland is a very progressive state, but if the federal laws change, providers in Maryland, despite the state law, could potentially be vulnerable for prosecution. And so I think it's important for there to be safeguards, legislative safeguards put into place so that providers can care for their patients without the fear of criminal prosecution. So, an example of that is in the VA, if a woman veteran was eligible for a VA covered abortion because it was life or health of the mother, rape, or incest, and they were getting the care in a VA facility, they could get that care even if they couldn't get it in the community. And so, what 17 Republicans, attorney generals, tried to do was to try and go after their medical licenses. So that even though what they were doing was lawful, and even though there were numerous memos that said if they're providing this care as part of their duties as a VA physician, it's lawful and allowable, they were going to go after their licenses. And so some VA providers would get licenses in multiple states so that if a red state with restrictive laws came after their license, they could still practice. Because in the federal government and in the military, if you have a state license, it doesn't matter which state it's from.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah.